There he is, Captain Birdseye.
Fucking hell, it's the fucking Hair Bear bunch.
Let me put the jacket on.
Have you not heard of topiary?
I'm married to a hairdresser as well. It's hilarious.
Oh, there's the chest rug.
She hates it. She chased me around with scissors, which obviously is not wise.
You literally look like Jesus.
Who's that other guy? Not David Bellamy. Who's the other one? Fucking hell.
It up quite well.
Leo Gordon's alive.
Who are
No, come on. Look, we can't take the piss out of the boss. Or are you the boss?
He thinks he's the boss. He ain't a fucking boss.
This is the first time we've had two guests on at the same time. It's going to be messy.
No, it's not.
It is, isn't it?
No, it's not.
He's going to give us the song now.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Your guitar now, Nick. Come on.
We had Simon on with Nick at one point, I think.
Oh, yeah, we did, yeah. Sorry, Simon. Anyway.
I just bounded into a podcast record. I'm like, here I am.
Have we started? Are we going to start? You know all this goes in, don't you?
If you'll shut up, then yes.
It's not going to happen.
Go on, then.
You didn't time it right.
He does this shit to me all the time.
Yeah, but I like the start to be professional. I don't just continue anyway.
That's what she said.
But you're going to edit it shitely anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's that word again.
Matter.
Anytime today.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Such a prick. He's such a prick. I apologise for him.
Hello and... fuck, my voice.
What the fuck was that?
Teenagers.
Fucking hell.
Hang on, I'm wilting. My mic's gone all floppy. Right.
That's what she said.
Put a lassie band round the base. Buttery biscuit base.
We haven't watched that one yet.
Fucking hell.
Just mute Craig's line until you're ready.
Hello Internet, I'm Firebolt.
And I'm the Orbiter.
And today we have two very special guests.
Debatable.
I mean, at least one of them is particularly special.
We've got to behave.
Oh, harsh, Nick.
We've got to behave.
Craig is very special.
Appropriately enough, what number am I thinking of?
69, dude.
Yes, welcome to episode 69, which is...
Have you seen it yet?
Which?
The Face the Music.
I have seen Face the Music. Craig hasn't seen Bogus Journey, so don't ask him about anything.
What the fuck? Oh, come on.
Craig hadn't seen Excellent Adventure until about 2 years ago, when I was like, "How have you not seen Excellent Adventure, you fucking turd?"
I must admit, Bogus Journey I did enjoy more on the rewatch than Excellent Adventure, even though it was it was very good. Excellent soundtrack. Anyway, I digress. We're talking about today.
Yeah, we got the...
I've had a beer already, I'm sorry. I apologise in advance.
Got the Podfather, Craig, and I don't believe you have a nickname on our thing yet.
Soapdish.
Oh, okay.
Or is that...
Yeah.
Oh, that's so like 2014.
No, why? It's
Petri
been my nickname since 2001. What's your problem?
Oh, Dr. Dre.
That came out in 2000.
Bastard. I was so close, I hit the post. He looks like Jesus now.
Anyway, we've got Craig and Nick on. I guess.
He literally looks like he's floating on water.
I thought you meant he's nailed to a piece of wood.
He could be in the bath now, just floating. Whoa, don't do the sign of the cross, Nick. You're going to hell.
Don't call Nick a floater.
He's called me much worse than that. I'm going to hell anyway. Hell doesn't exist.
You're not getting a word in today.
Can we get in with the format and do the news?
News. So today, this doesn't go out till next Thursday, so it might be dead by then.
Okay, Donald Trump is dead.
Personal news first.
Oh.
The Orbiter, by the time this goes out, will have reached the grand old age of 94.
49. It's my birthday on Tuesday, or 2 days ago.
Happy birthday.
Oh, 49, dude.
Yeah. That's almost half a century.
It's older than Craig.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe.
Only just, though.
Yeah.
46 I am. I'm 46.
Well, funnily enough, some of the stuff we'll be talking about later on, you might remember from the decade where racism was particularly acceptable.
Has racism
Literally
never
every
been?
decade.
Surely racism is more acceptable now than it was even in the 80s.
Well, racism isn't acceptable anytime.
It's normalised now.
There you go.
Yeah, well, I don't think.
It's just renamed as the suburbs.
We've skipped over the news. Come on, let's rewind. Trump.
Yes, Trump apparently has COVID-19.
AIDS. Oh.
There's a couple of sort of.
Did you see his
questions
physician?
here.
His physician out on outside the hospital today, doing his interview
Yeah, I did.
with the media, dodging just about every question. I don't want to say anything about that. I don't want to.
He's just on the. I'm just watching the news now. He's had some work done. That physician. His skin is like glass.
I've got to say, it reminded me a lot of the death of Stalin.
Yeah, I think someone said the sort of shot of the doctors at the sort of press podium looked like it'd been lifted straight from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that now you mention it.
So what's your thoughts on this situation then? Because we've been chatting about it, like me and Craig and some of the other podcasters, we've been chatting about it a bit. And obviously this is something that is unfolding right now as it's being recorded.
Well, there's been some doubts
This is
about
gonna be
whether
so
or
out
not
of
he
date.
actually has it,
It's going to be so out of date
from
by
what
the
I've
time this goes out.
gathered. I think he probably does, because, I mean, it's just a statistical probability, really, but...
I'm going to go straight out there and say what I think probably a lot of people are thinking, but don't want to say, but not in the way that I think. A lot of people will say, well, I wouldn't wish for anyone to die from it. Yeah. I'm not going as controversial as you think I'm going to, but I'm just trying to think of all the outcomes that could happen. And in terms of politically, I don't think there's a good outcome for America other than that.
Careful what you wish for, though.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. I don't want that to happen, but I'm just thinking of all the other options. Like, for instance, if he makes a full recovery, he's going to sell it as though it wasn't such a big thing to beat, or that, you know, he's strong. I mean, this was what gets on my nerves, is like Boris saying, oh, he's sure they're both going to come through it strongly and all this lot. Like it's got anything to do with...
This is the thing now. I think the sort of three main strongman leaders of the West, Boris Johnson, Jair Bolsonaro, and Trump, have now all gotten COVID from their own hubris, essentially. None of them have died yet, but it's sort of...
Sorry,
it feels...
Isn't the hubris in between the vagina and the bumhole?
No, it's a plectrum.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I'm messing about with the sound. and it's-
Isn't that what you played the guitar with?
Yeah.
No, that's a
I
spectrum.
thought it was the perineum.
Yeah, no,
Can you
it is a
shut
perineum.
up?
I was just trying to make an awful joke.
No, you know what I mean. I don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm not saying that I want Donald Trump to die. I'm just saying, of all the outcomes politically for America, anything other than that is probably going to be more damaging.
The best I could say about it is that I'm indifferent to it, in the same way that I'm indifferent to the 200,000 other deaths that he's exacerbated in his inaction on the pandemic.
I'm not saying I want Donald Trump to die, but I'll probably have a street party.
You're
thing
literally
with-
not allowed.
A part of me wants him
Yeah.
to die, though, like, horribly. And that scares me about myself, but it feels justified.
No, it doesn't. You know what? You shouldn't feel like that, and I'll tell you why. Because what he's done in his tenure, in the 4 years or so that he's been in power, and all right, he took the inauguration in January, so it's not, you know, when the election happens, and then when they actually like come into power, there's a period of time that lapses. But what happened is very similar to what we saw here, especially in England, with regards to Brexit. I don't know what it's like in Scotland, but I remember waking up the morning of Brexit, and I hold my hand up, very embarrassed about it, but I voted for Brexit for all the reasons other people didn't vote for it, and I was obviously very misled, like a lot of people. But it was certainly not to do. Brexit. But it was certainly not to do with getting the immigrants out.
Yeah,
that wasn't what that wasn't part of my rhetoric at all. But obviously, I learnt that was the majority of it. I remember waking up like after Brexit and hearing all of these things that were happening that first weekend, where you got graffiti like saying, right, get out of our country and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, oh my God, what have we allowed to happen?
I think with respect to that, that's the sort of people that would do something like that and outwardly espouse those views are probably in quite a slim minority of those voters.
But they'll offend,
but what
legitimise.
Yeah, they're a sort of
normalise the
wider part of the whole electorate, and Remain voters are included in this, that sort of have this casual racism where they'll just sort of have sort of narratives about people. They won't inherently see black people as being stupid or whatever, but that sort of have unconscious opinions about things.
Yes, but what happened was it then completely legitimized their freedom to do that. That was a problem. I didn't realize, I think very naively, I didn't realize that people genuinely felt like that. And as soon as that happened, all of a sudden it felt like, oh, okay, Brexit's happening. That means I can now sprout this stuff without any kind of fear of repercussion. And what we saw when Trump first got into power, after that election result was announced, is the same kind of thing. Like almost immediately, Mexicans were being targeted and going, you need to go back before the wall's built and all this kind of stuff. You saw this thing, you started seeing more and more of these personal attacks physically and verbally.
What worries me
before.
I think both sides of the Atlantic as well, what worries me is that over the time that has passed since those events took place, since Trump came in and since we voted for Brexit, is how everything seems, all those things that shocked us that were happening straight after the vote seem to have kind of disappeared from the news, and things have become, like kids being kept in cages and them talking about putting refugees on ferries and stuff like that. Just seems normal now, even though, it's not kind of acceptable. It's just not that big a news item anymore. Recently,
the Home Office talking about deporting people and processing them on Ascension Island for some reason.
And the wave machine. Don't forget the wave machine that was going to push the boats back. They were going to have.
Was that something to do with a wall? A wall in the channel or something?
Well, yeah. So what it wasn't a physical wall, although that had also been muted. But one of the other harebrained ideas was that they were going to have these really powerful jet machines near Dover, which would, as boats came towards them, they would be switched on to basically push them back. And of course, the problem with that is immediately, they might capsize, so we can't possibly do that. But even the fact that he was even spoken about for a second is just mental. But
it's just so bizarre as well. I think this is something with that whole Operation Moonshot thing, where they're planning to pour billions of pounds into something for which the technology doesn't exist. Meanwhile, other countries are just getting on with actually implementing effective measures. I think Italy had like a half an hour test that they used at airports that they're now using in schools. So I think this is something that Boris Johnson did with Brexit as well, with like the Northern Irish border, planning to do really weird, complicated checks that just are impossible with current technology.
Well, there was the thing about, like, they're practically talking about having a virtual border around Kent, aren't they?
Yeah, it's what Craig's wanted in Liverpool for years, is for them to be called their own
build
place.
A wall, build
exactly.
A wall. But what all this is breeding is a breaking up of the union. Because Scotland have been banging on about it for 4 or 5 years. Since they had the vote.
I can't remember.
Hanging on it for a while longer, but yeah, that's where it entered into public eye.
Now Wales are starting to talk about it.
Yeah, I did notice that. I think it was on Frankie Boyle's thing.
I've
talking
never
about
heard
Welsh
of
nationalism.
Wales talking about independence. Do you know what I mean?
It's in fashion.
But where does it stop? Does Cornwall break away? Joking aside, does Liverpool? We don't class ourselves as English. We're Scousers. But where does it stop? Tosses, yeah. Do you know what I mean? It just we're
all see what happens.
We're all looking to blame somebody or something for the state that we're in at the moment, and it all sounds very familiar. It's a build up to the Second World War, basically. We're reliving it. We're looking for somebody to blame for our hardships, for everything that we've put ourselves in by deregulating the banks, by dirty money, dirty loans.
Who do you think is going to get it this time?
It's not the average person that voted for that directly, though. They may have voted for the Tories and been tricked into voting for that indirectly, but if you ask people if they want to cut taxes for the rich and strip back, roll in privatisation for the NHS, various things like that, they'd probably say no, but then when you put them up against all the fear-mongering against someone like Jeremy Corbyn, then they're like, oh yeah, we'll go with that, that's a sensible option.
Yeah, and the NHS was exactly the reason why I voted for Brexit. I thought, I really... Did
you say breakfast then?
Yeah, breakfast. I voted for breakfast.
I like breakfast.
Get out for breakfast. I bought into that whole thing of, if we don't need to pay into the European Union, we can pay into the NHS, and knowing that was something that was really struggling because I knew people that worked in it, I was like, well, that makes sense. Of course it makes sense. But, it was just stupidity on my part. But going back to your original point, Firebolt, which is where we kind of led to now about your feelings on Trump and, feeling bad about your views on what happens to him. The point I was trying to make was that he's not a nice man. Not only is he not a nice man, he has led, in my opinion, he's led America to allow the racism to fester and manifest and grow over the last 4 years. He's never denounced it. Even the other day at the debate, he said the thing about the Proud Boys, which is now kind of like saying, oh no, I didn't mean it like that, but he clearly said it.
Yeah, and he pretended he's never heard of him now, hasn't he?
Exactly. It's absolute nonsense.
He does that a lot.
Yeah.
Associates with someone really shady and then goes,
thing is, though,
who is that?
At his age,
no clue.
At his age, do you think it's calculated, or do you think he's literally just going senile?
No, he's playing the bumbling fool.
There's people around that are doing that, but yeah,
we've got one in charge. I can see all the signs. And one of the things that I pointed out the other day, when talking to some other friends about this whole situation with Trump and the COVID, is the storyline is very similar to what we got with Boris. Boris got announced as having COVID, and he was okay. And then within about 24 hours, he was taken to hospital.
Yeah.
And then we were hearing conflicting stories. That the narrative is exactly the same. And what we saw with Boris after he pulled through is that, the popularity then kind of changed. The narrative changed in the country's opinion of what was going on, and especially with regards to what his party were doing. And the timing of this is, and that's the worst thing. I know you shouldn't think of it like that, but the timing of this is just so unusual. It came after a very catastrophic debate that happened. No one looked particularly good, but Trump obviously came off a lot worse than it.
Yeah.
His popularity has started to tank, and the only people who seem to really care are this kind of cult that he has been able to captivate very much in the same way that we have it over here. And look, the bottom line is he's not a nice man. He's denounced all of these deaths. He's never taken ownership for it. He's spent time saying masks are not required. He's turned around saying it's not a problem. He's turned around saying the sunshine will kill it. Inject yourself with bleach. All this kind of nonsense to kind of get away from it. and just not accepted responsibility for what he's done. He is responsible for a lot more deaths than he will ever. Well, he won't admit to any of them, but he's responsible for a lot of what's gone on in America, and the reason why it's still so high even now.
Just around coronavirus as well, ignoring the past 3 years of his presidency that were also horrible, and the situation now where I think he declared Portland, Seattle, and New York anarchist jurisdictions, which is just kind of weird, but it feels like a sort of cry to remove them from taking part in the election, essentially.
And also as well, like if you want to go back even further than that, way in the past, before he was even looking at becoming president, right? I watched that show last year about Central Park 5.
Yeah.
He took a full page ad out in the New York, I think it was the New York Times, asking for them to be given a death penalty based on the little evidence they had even then at the time, and calling them for the death penalty for the alleged rape of this woman. I mean, obviously, when I say alleged rape, I mean their involvement in it. She was clearly raped. And, luckily they managed to find out who did it later on. But the fact that he went to that effort, and even now, the fact that they got released, that they had their conviction overturned, and he still will not accept that they are innocent, is disgraceful.
See, I sort of get the sort of calls about what Trump deserves and what someone might wish upon him being two different things, but I don't really get it from the sort of conservatives that have called for the death penalty on criminals with shaky convictions, especially with relation to like the UK, talking about migrants in the Mediterranean, like cockroaches, essentially, calling for them to die and be drowned, and specifically going out of their way to just be as horrible as they can to some of the most downtrodden people on the planet.
It's going to be an interesting few. Every time, for the last 3 or 4 years, I think I've been just saying this year or this next 6 months is going to be really interesting. It's like, I mean, but if you think about the rest of this year and next year as well, once we get past 31st of December, it's like you just don't know what's going to happen, do you?
No.
COVID and Brexit at the moment are going hand in hand, and they are burying news stories left, right, and centre.
It's a perfect shield, isn't it?
Yeah, whenever something big for COVID is coming out, there'll be a big Brexit story, and vice versa. So 2-3 weeks ago, dating this again, but there was all these rubber dinghies coming across the North Sea, and that was burying the COVID news.
Yeah, and
no one's reporting on them now.
You could quite clearly notice as well, in sort of reaction to sort of increased awareness of Black Lives Matter, bringing out these stories of, the BBC is going to stop playing Rule Britannia or something.
Oh, that was bollocks.
And it's like, nobody fucking cares. That's just
well, no, that's not true. Absolute gammons care.
Well, yeah, they care that it's there, but just so they could sing about an empire that doesn't exist anymore.
That land of hope and glory ruins pomp and circumstance anyway. Elgar hated it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, anyway, with regards to that this whole story was about an event that people couldn't attend.
Yeah.
So it's not, people turning around saying they can't stop us singing it. Well, they literally are stopping you singing it because you're not allowed to be there. Yeah. If you want to be at home watching it on the telly and sing along to it, knock yourselves out. Yeah. No one's saying that you are not able to do that anymore, but you were talking about an event that didn't involve any audience anyway, so there was not going to be a sing-along. It was just another distraction tactic, and we're seeing it more and more, and we're definitely seeing in America. Look, this has also come hot off the heels. What was it? Trump got announced with having COVID the early hours of Friday morning in the UK, which was 4 days after the whole $750 paid in tax.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, this week, Monday through Friday for Trump was tax returns in dispute, awful debate on Tuesday, another rally event on Wednesday where, again, social distancing and anti-maskers were apparent. And then, Thursday, I'm getting a bit sick. The timing was just very convenient again.
Mm. Totally different subject, but I thought it was quite. Everything obviously is happening online now. I take it. I mean, Craig, you're obviously driving again, aren't you? You're driving.
I've never not been driving.
But do you work from home, Nick?
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously everything's happening. I'm glad that neither of us are actually in hall of residence now. We're students. But
dodging hippies.
One of the tutorials I did this week, there was one of the students that was on the call was on their phone on a bus in Hong Kong.
Wow.
Which was interesting. They're apparently going to be in Aberdeen in about a month or something, but it's like I wouldn't bother.
Yeah,
We've got a better internet connection there anyway.
Being stranded abroad that were planning to come up to study, but they've had flights cancelled and stuff.
But yeah, so I was gonna play you a short clip of something, but I don't really need to. I'll just make reference to it because you'll have seen plenty of it before. Do you guys remember? Well, Craig, you might. Do you remember "Love Thy Neighbour" in the 70s?
Vaguely.
Well, if you have a look on YouTube sometime, listeners, there's a compilation of racist moments from Love Thy Neighbour, and it is really uncomfortable to watch.
I bet it's really long as well.
Yeah.
2 hours.
But I think the weird thing about it is hearing the audience laughter. Basically, I mean, I don't want to repeat any of what's said, but it's out and out racist stuff. But what I find interesting is obviously, in that context, it's meant as comedy. But what's changed, I think, is what is acceptable as comedy now is very different. And I think while it might not be intended to be insulting or harmful to anyone at the time, it's the way that kind of seeps into cultural attitudes through kind of being exposed to it.
I'm not sure of the specific examples here, but a lot of these things, it's sort of you can joke about racism, and you can joke about topics involving disabled people, gay people, but if you strip it back and the joke is just they're black, they're gay, they're disabled, then it fails on a comedic level, not only a sort of social responsibility level.
Well, I think one of the big difficulties...
Gingers, you'd always miss the gingers out.
Oh, there's a brilliant song by Tim Minchin about that. Anyway.
Oh, yes, there is actually. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
What was I going to say? I've lost the plot. Oh, yeah, there was a thing in the news a few days ago. They're talking. They're trying to bring in. Obviously, there's different things that are classed as hate crimes in terms of racism and sexism and all that. But they're trying to bring in different definitions that will cover things such as ageism, and which don't actually create any extra laws, but they allow the law to define specific other offences under those terms, like assault or whatever, on the basis of age or hair length, or all these different things. And I think the difficulty with the comedy thing is that I kind of get that thing about offence is something that people take. It's not given, and it's something might be intended in good humour, but you can't gauge how it's received when it's given out blanket to everyone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can make a joke with somebody who takes it well, and you can assess how they take it. But if you're putting something out on the TV or on a podcast, you can't gauge how every single member of your audience is going to take it. You can't guarantee somebody's not going to be insulted or offended. So it's a different playing field.
We've got in trouble before because we've said stuff and people have taken and you thought in your obviously you got to be quite careful with what you say quite often, and I've never deliberately gone out of my way to say something that I thought was going to be that controversial might actually hurt somebody, and it goes to show that you can pretty much upset people in thousands of different ways without really intending to. But I do think how things are taken are quite important. So you said about I heard you mention Alf Garnett. Yeah. Now Alf Garnett is a really funny case because Alf Garnett was, according to the creator, was used as a kind of not someone to champion, but as someone to kind of ridicule because of their outdated views and how wrong they were. Yeah. But the audience of Alf Garnett, of those shows that he was in, very much took the opposite view and took him as, you could be a bigot, you could be a racist, you could be sexist. And that was a good thing.
Because it made people laugh.
This is something that I've noticed with a lot of older comedies, and even like going to modern theatre shows where...
Cherry Pepsi Max.
Certain jokes elicit a different reaction from the audience that feels very uncomfortable, but I know that's not to do with what's actually on screen or on stage.
What?
Well, a good example would be I think you played in Legally Blonde. There's a song in that called Gay or European, which as a song, it's fine. There's nothing particularly bad in it. But it was kind of the way that the audience responded that just kind of made me feel like, I'm not one of these people.
But I think that might have been specifically, or might be more relevant to an American audience.
Yeah. I think it was particularly because the gay or European character was played by, I think, a teenager, fairly young person, like acting quite extravagantly in that sort of way. It was kind of weird.
Have either of you seen or heard of Avenue Q?
I've seen it multiple times.
Is it still on? It's not still on, is it?
No, it's been touring for a bit.
Yeah.
I don't believe it's touring now. Obviously, it's literally not touring now. But what I mean is, I don't think there was an active tour, but there was one a year or two ago.
Yeah,
it was going around the country. But I saw it about 3 or 4 times in the West End. I was a big fan.
Is this the puppet thing?
Everyone's a little bit racist. Is that the song in there?
The song is Everyone's a Little Bit Racist. The last line of the song is that.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that's like the punchline at the end, because that line is sung by a Chinese character, but but that's the only time it's sung like that, is the very last line of the song.
Because that's interesting. I mean, like I think most people who maybe are racist would think that they're not, or would claim not to be. I'm sure there are plenty that are kind of out and out racist and proud of it, but I certainly wouldn't think of myself as racist. But then, having said that, when I think about it, there's times when I could have been accused of it. For instance, the way that I've maybe talked about the Welsh, or maybe even like
always just exceptions.
Using strange accents and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, there's that sort of jokey kind of racism, but then you get to that sort of more serious kind where it's more just not realizing how you benefit from certain institutions that are sort of embroiled in racism, but also how you might sort of feed those things. If that makes sense.
Do you know subconscious, isn't it? Subconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I think is really important, a really important distinction with this, is that if you say something innocently and it's pointed out that actually that could be seen as racist or as insensitive or something like that, I feel it's then what you decide to do about that. If you go on the defense and try and say, well, no, that's not the intention at all, and actually, and kind of go on like a little rant about it, then I think that kind of proves the point. But I think just saying something that can be construed that way without the intention behind it being of such, I think that's quite an important distinction to make. Because, I mean, even I remember laughing at Little Britain. That's probably the last time.
That's scary watching some of that now.
Well, that's what I mean. And the thing is, watching that, and also, what was the follow-up? Come Fly With Me, was it?
Yeah.
Right. And I watched that, and, now I'm thinking about it, and you've got Matt Lucas portraying an Asian actor with, like brown body paint on or whatever he was using, makeup. The characters in Little Britain were, again, they blacked up.
Yeah.
I didn't see it. And when you think about it, you think, well, of course it is. But I didn't see it as racist or possibly offending people.
No.
But of course it was. Of course it. You look back and you go, yeah, actually, it's really insensitive.
I did ask Pate if he would be interested in coming on, but he wasn't available because he's Dutch. Is he Dutch or is he?
Yeah,
he's from Netherlands. I get it mixed up because I offend people by getting Holland and the Netherlands mixed up. And
Holland is a region of the Netherlands that's often confused for the whole country.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, what I was going to say was, have you heard of Black Peter?
Yes.
Have we talked about Black Pete before, Craig?
Oh, you brought it up on. It was either Discover DLP or it was the last Disney Parks and Beyond. That made me look it up. And the Netherlands have been asked by the United Nations to stop kind of using it. Do you know about Black Peter?
Yeah, it's something that it's sort of in the same sort of vein as like the minstrel shows that you would have seen in America and Britain with white people playing black people, basically making a joke out of black people.
But the Black and White Minstrels is on its Christmas podcast quite regularly.
The plug, he had to get the plug in there.
And genuinely, in 1950s Great Britain, the Black and White Minstrels were topping the album chart.
I remember seeing it every Saturday night in the 1970s, and
so even right through the 60s, as you say, they were there.
But do you remember there was a program? I can't remember what it was, but Lenny Henry whited up in something.
Well, he made a film where he did that, called, I think, off the top of my head, True Identity.
Oh, it could have been. Yeah.
But no, I think he did it elsewhere.
There's been American actors who've done the same. What's the one? It was a comedy.
White Chicks, I think.
Yeah, there's two things here. So there was a thing a while ago, a few months ago, where people were accusing Robert Downey Jr. of being racist because I think Tropic Thunder had just been on TV or something.
Yeah.
And so they were saying, well, he's racist because he's done this. Now, if you've not seen the film, which I actually think is a good film, although I've not seen it for a while, Robert Downey Jr. plays an actor who is like so method it hurts.
Yeah. It's basically the Three Amigos.
Yeah, but I'm talking the context of the character.
Yeah.
So, the joke is that he felt he needed to become a black man to portray this character in this film. And the whole film he's ridiculed for it because obviously that it's just unnecessary and ridiculous and racist. So that's almost the punchline of the whole character. This guy's gone so method, it's too far.
I think it's sort of out of context, taking where the joke is that they're racist,
right?
As that had the film kind of made.
Yeah, had the film kind of not done that, then you can absolutely point it out. It's almost the opposite of Little Britain. And then with White Chicks, because people were then saying, well, White Chicks is racist. Well, no, White Chicks isn't racist. The whole gimmick behind that is you've got two police officers, and I've only seen it once, so I'm trying to remember this as best I can. But you've got two black policemen who need to go undercover because they, people will recognise them, and so they go as incognito as possible, which is, putting on this ridiculously awful prosthetic white makeup and becoming women. Like, again, the whole if you're taking it completely out of context, yeah, you can argue there might be some kind of racism in either of those films, but then neither of them really are.
It's interesting though, because the more sort of we talk about the different ways that racism has appeared on TV and in film, the more you sort of kind of getting towards, does art in general have a responsibility to highlight this stuff by... Yeah, it's a difficult line to walk, and obviously people are going to get it wrong from time to time. But is it something that comedy and art forms need to highlight because it's somewhere that it can be done?
I think with a lot of these things, like the issues of sort of white people not knowing when they're being racist by making certain jokes that with a greater knowledge of the context in which that happened, like you could understand how that's a problem, is to have more people of colour in like the boardrooms of whatever film company, just to sort of be a part of the process and have someone go, hang on, maybe we should take that bit out, like maybe that we don't need that, if that makes sense.
I think that's a massive problem, and it always has been a massive problem, is the lack of representation, namely behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Whenever you kind of like bring up the arts and racism and the fact that you obviously predominantly see more white people, the argument is always, well, you've got more black actors now. Well, that's not really the issue. It's not that you don't see black people at all. It's the fact that the people making decisions, the people writing these things, or even making these things, the art suffers because it's if you don't have a wealth of people from different ethnicities and backgrounds and experiences, then you're going to get a very kind of convoluted outcome, no matter who's doing it.
Look at Premier League football. I know you boys aren't into that, but you've got a hell of a lot of footballers from, all creeds, colours, everything. But then you look at the management of the clubs, the directorship of the clubs, the ownership of the clubs, and it is 99% predominantly white.
Yeah.
And the same with cricket, the same with rugby. All the major sports, they might have, you might see more black footballers, cricketers, rugby players now. They're outweighing.
You get them in the sort of the public eye, the front line, like you say, the actual players, the actors, the musicians.
The interesting thing here as well with politics, where we're seeing a lot more black and Asian politicians than in the past. But if you look at the people that are sort of funding those political parties and that actually have the money, the real power there, that are kind of sort of almost employing the politicians because they end up funding their parties, the vast majority of them are white and often Americans.
I was thinking, like, especially with being four of us now, it's a really difficult subject to talk about with any kind of authority for white
guys.
It's like,
any of
are you muted?
Ever been? Am I muted?
No, I was muted.
Has any of you ever been openly racist, whether you meant it or not?
I remember telling jokes at junior school about that for the visual gag, what's this? An Ethiopian eating a crisp, which is back when they were going through famine, and it's like, but it was like, there was other ones that went round at school, and you kind of found yourself laughing at them, but you knew you shouldn't. Like,
I basically ruined a friendship in school. We had, in Liverpool anyway, back in the 80s especially, there wasn't a lot of black people, if any. So in our school, we had one black person, and he just happened to be my friend. And we used to dig holes with lolly ice sticks in the tarmac. We just me and him were just mates, and I seen my other friends, being racist to him, and I didn't see myself or feel myself that I was racist. But then me and him, this is I think we went together through the infants, into the juniors, and then into the seniors. And one day, me and him have a row about some shit or whatever it was, and I actually called him the N-word.
Yeah.
So sorry, Craig.
Well, it basically, the friendship was never the same ever again. Ever. We never recovered from it.
I mean, I remember friends calling like a coloured guy. I mean, I don't even know if coloured is an acceptable description.
Generally not used anymore. It kind of...
It
was a sort of language used to basically say coloured
not
people
white
aren't allowed here, basically.
I hope things have changed in school.
I mean, it's not like... It's sort of probably not acceptable for a politician to say, but it's understandable if you don't know. But
all these racist jokes are coming into my mind now, and it's like you just think,
in
like,
general, that sort of
does that still happen now?
Framing of colour and no colour as being white and everybody else is kind of generalising a lot of people's struggles.
You're the link here at school. Nowadays, did you experience much in terms of racist jokes going around? And
definitely, I mean, it's sort of being in a rural part of Scotland. It's still very white. I think you could probably count the number of black people at my school on your fingers.
But are you just as likely to get anti-English jokes, though?
I didn't really detect much anti-Englishness.
Okay.
I did notice one of my friends in my friend group was Lithuanian, and I did notice on a couple of occasions people sort of directing particularly nasty jokes at him.
I wouldn't even know how to make a nasty joke about a Lithuanian.
Well, it's more just sort of general sort of
foreigner type.
Kind of almost sort of stuff like around the Red Scare against sort of Eastern Europeans.
What, nowadays?
Swan or something.
Well, like various sort of things that people might say about Russians, because Lithuania's nearish. They'd probably.
I thought we'd left all that behind in the 80s, but
no. And a lot of people still saying the N-word.
I've got two stories, both happened at junior school. The first, so when I was at junior school, I lived in an area that was predominantly Asian. It was just outside of, it was kind of like the East London Essex border, and huge influx of people from India and Pakistan around that time. Not because of immigration, just how things were. And in one, I think it was my last year of primary school, I was the only white person in my class other than the teacher. Everyone else was either Hindu or Sikh or Muslim. And I had a row with a couple of kids one day, and they told me to go back to my own country. Now, it's kind of a weird racism start because, officially there is no racism against white people. That's kind of like what the guidelines are, but I still think it was a weird thing to say and has stuck with me. But the second one was actually on my first day of school, my first proper day of school, and I made friends with a kid who wasn't white, and I can't remember how it was approached, but I think the teacher had asked me who I'd been playing with that day, and I said, that boy over there, Jonathan. And she said, the half-caste boy. And from that moment on, because I asked them what that meant, because I didn't know, I never heard the term before. And she said, he's got a white mum and a black dad. That's why he's the skin colour he is. And I said, okay, fine. So that's what it was. So for my life, I assumed that when you had a child that was mixed race, half caste was an absolutely okay term to use.
Yeah, for years that was just what you called them.
Yeah, and it obviously isn't. And I only learned that a few years ago because my godson is mixed race, and we were having a conversation. I can't even remember what led to it. We was having a conversation about race and how people are treated and everything like that. And that term came up, and I was like, kind of like in a gasp. I was like, that's not right. And they were like, no, that's totally not right. And explained to me like where the origins of the term half caste meant.
Yeah, what are they? I was just going to ask, what does it actually mean?
It was. I don't want to say Latin, but it was something like that. But basically, it was an insult into someone who was not equal to others.
Right. Right. Yeah, because people are from a particular caste. Is that like a sort of a class or something?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember now, but I'm sure a Google search will find it. But yeah, so it was kind of explained to me why it wasn't, and obviously I felt awful. And my friend said to me, "Well, don't feel bad if you didn't know."
I'll tell you what, I had a similar situation until I moved, and this was as recent as moving up here. So I was in my 30s, and it was when my wife first pulled me up on it, because I said something about somebody being a nonce, and you'll get this, Craig. I just thought it was not a term of endearment, but I just thought it was just one of those kind of jokey names that you call somebody. I didn't actually know what it meant at that point.
You used to watch on CBeebies in the 80s, Noncing Around, or was that just a regional programme?
No, it was just regional, Craig, yeah.
Noncing Around.
I've never heard of it.
Noncing Around,
honestly.
There were a lot of TV shows in which they did that, but I'm not sure they were called that.
No, none were as blatant as that.
It's funny. I mean, getting back to the It's Christmas podcast as well.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I've been on here for like almost an hour, and I've not mentioned one of my 12 podcasts.
Yeah, it hasn't done Disney Life
because a lot of the stuff that's coming out on because you're going back through rose-tinted spectacles, looking at the Christmases of yesteryear.
Well,
there's a lot of racists coming out and a lot of nonsense.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable how everything that was normal.
I heard the term nonce being thrown around, and the reason I didn't realize what it actually meant was because back then, as I mean, it might have been my age and my naivety, but they kind of weren't a thing. Do you know what I mean? You didn't really have. I mean, I suppose there were kind of. I don't know if there were such things as child molesters, but
well, you did. You had the don't get in the van, the white van.
Yeah, but I was never told why.
The puppies.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I knew about like, you might get kidnapped, but they never said anything about what they were going to actually do to you.
Well, then they'd have to teach you about sex and rape, and then understand. Oh, hang on, there's a lot of really weird sex stuff that we're actually teaching you here. Oh well, ignore that.
You know, we say nonce in Liverpool. I've said to Nick, nonce in Liverpool is a term of endearment. It's not. It's the ultimate put down. So when for him, it's cunt down there, isn't it? You call everyone a cunt. Well, up here, it's nonce. If I'm calling you a nonce, it's because you're a fucking gobshite, basically.
But we actually use cunt in both contexts. It's used as a term of endearment as well as the ultimate insult. So.
In Glasgow, I think you can say, "Oh, he's a good cunt," and no one would bat an eyelid.
But surely that idea of warning against something but not giving you the reasons why is more damaging, because to me the idea of getting into a van with a stranger or whatever was because I was told that they were like an evil character, that, you know, they were going to be nasty to you or whatever. But a nonce wouldn't actually come across like that. They would come across as really nice.
What's the thing in...
and unless you know
Chitty
what the
Chitty
ulterior
Bang Bang.
motive is, you're not going to be guarding against it. You know what I mean?
What's the villain in Chitty Chitty
Child
Bang Bang?
catcher.
Yeah, I think it's sort of portrayed as that rather than...
But I was at the same kind of attitude towards the whole just say no to drugs message, because it was seen as this like really dangerous, evil, nasty thing, or portrayed as that. And then as soon as you have your first joint, you realise that you've been lied to about the whole thing. So you're not going to be listening to any of the rest of the message then, are you?
No.
Yeah, it's sort of... You need
kind of
nuance with it, which
tangented a bit.
I think... Well, bringing it back to racism, I think a lot of sort of terms are just sort of say, oh, you can't say that, but without actually explaining why and the sort of history behind it that means that it's not okay. And then you get people going, oh, well, it's not that much of a big deal if I say the N-word.
I'm going to bring up one of the documentary things that I watched as part of one of my courses. Had an interview with Nichelle Nichols on it. And she was talking about she couldn't believe when she was taken into the NASA control room, she couldn't believe the diversity of people that were in there. Like there were women of all ages, there were black people, and they were all mixed in working in the NASA control room together. And she was just flabbergasted, because she was like, well, why is this not being portrayed by the media? You know, why have I gone into this room expecting to see a bunch of middle-aged white men?
But then look at the. I mean, going back to the uproar here at the moment now about things, right? It was only, I think, a Christmas or 2 Christmases ago that Tesco's ran a campaign, an advertising campaign, with a mixed race family, and people collectively lost their shit.
Well, what's just happened with that dance troupe?
Diversity. Oh yeah.
Which is kind of like, you'd expect it, right? It's a dance troupe called Diversity.
They are diverse. Then there's like people from all different backgrounds in that group.
But you got to wonder how much of it is just media whipping up extremist views.
Definitely to be held accountable for, I think. But I mean, we're obviously not going to use it because none of us, I think, like the word. But the one thing that I really have issue with, and I've had conversations with people to try and understand the whole story with this, is the N-word. So it's obviously extremely taboo. You shouldn't use it in any context. I completely agree with that. What I don't understand, and it does seem to be more of an American thing than a British thing, so maybe there's more hidden kind of context behind this, but the use of the N-word in rap music, in black culture in general, whether that's films, musicals, stage shows, whatever. I've been told it's kind of like to empower, it's to reclaim the word, but to me it's a little bit like the swastika. The swastika was a symbol of peace originally, and then was taken as, the symbol of Nazi Germany, and can only really now be associated with Nazi Germany. Anyone that tells you now they've got a swastika for any other reason is lying to themselves, or just not willing to tell you the truth.
I think it's still used as some symbol in Hinduism, but
no, that's where it came from.
Yeah,
that's
I think
it came from.
Some places still use it for that reason, but
but that's different, because again, that's the kind of the origins of it. What
Is there
I'm
not
kind
a
of
similar
about,
kind of story behind the use of the word queer, though, and to a certain extent gay, that was kind of claimed, because there was a time when that would have only been used as an insult, even though it doesn't seem as harsh as the N-word.
It depends who you are, I suppose,
Yeah.
onto how it makes you feel. But
Probably one that I think would be more equivalent for gay people would probably be fag or faggot.
But they wouldn't use that for each other, though, would they?
I've heard some people
heard
sort of proudly proclaiming themselves as fags, but it's sort of like if someone's using that to like call another gay person like a fag, then and they're not gay themselves, then
well, I mean,
it very quickly changes the meaning.
See, going back to what you were talking about, the sort of rap music context there, I've been sort of deliberately broadening my musical tastes, going through lists on rocklist.net of like top albums and stuff from different publications, and one of them that I got led to was a Dizzy Rascal album, and listening to that, the lyrics in that, you've kind of got to approach it from the point of view of what angle are they taking, because there's some highly disrespectful stuff in there if you're taking it at face value. But I think the explanation for that is that he's trying to reflect the way the people in the environment that he's talking about behave. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do, but then that kind of goes back to the Afghani argument, doesn't it? Which is, it's all right for the person behind it to say, "Oh, well, this is actually my intention."
Yeah.
But if you don't know that intention before going into it, you are going to take it at face value.
Yeah.
So I don't think. I
suppose that's where context comes in, isn't it? Because it's a prime example of that would be one of the songs he's talking about. There's a group of them out at a club eyeing up some girl, and I think the lyrics something like "marks out of 10, I'd give her 1." And you think, well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been in situations where I've been out with friends, and we've not in a non-threatening way said similar things. But if you go and put it in a song and give it out to the entire public, it takes on a whole new dimension. Do you know what I mean? It's very different, sort of having a harmless joke between you and friends.
Yeah, it's sort of giving
that isn't going to reach ears that are going to be
shine
offended
of
by
celebrity,
it, and actually putting it out in public as an acceptable view.
Yeah, and if you went up and said that to somebody, not designed as like a cheesy chat up line, because I mean, I've used that as a cheesy chat up line. I mean, I can't tell you how successful or not that was, but yeah, I think with that, it can vary depending on the intended use of it and the actions of it as well. So I think it can be problematic.
It's a dangerous line to walk, especially if you've been drinking.
Yeah. Craig is desperate to say something there.
I'm yawning past myself, boys. I am flagging.
Drink more booze.
No more booze. I might need to go to bed in a minute. I'll be honest.
Good, the party can start them.
Yeah. Everything that you're saying is absolutely valid, but this isn't going to be fixed in one generation.
Yeah.
This isn't going. Human memory is 100 years. The living human memory is 100 years. Basically, and that is how long your elders live. So human memory used to be 40 years. We're now up to like 100 years, and we're now forgetting the stuff that was led up to World War II, in very much the way we forgot the horrors of World War One and everything else that went before that. We're now the last vestiges of the greatness that was our heroes of World War II are dying. And right-wing fascism is coming back. It's actually coming back. And when something becomes the normal, the next level up is shock and awe.
Yeah,
and
but that's when
that becomes normal.
That's when the people who have been tolerating the unacceptability for a certain amount of time suddenly become scared and en masse, I suppose, start keeping their mouths shut in case of what happens to them.
And that's what happened in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, though, as well with this is it's very much what you learn and what you're taught. Like, I was taught nothing to do really with Black history. Very little conversation about slavery, for example. It was mainly Tudors, Egyptians, Romans, World War II. That was my history throughout school. Now, I'm just looking here. I took a picture earlier on of some books that my daughter's got. Now, my daughter's 7. She has a series of books called Little People, Big Dreams. And that's what they kind of look like. They're very kiddie fied versions of books, but all of them, there's a whole series, and all of them take somebody that had an importance in history or cultural significance, and they basically tell that story in a kid-friendly way.
Yeah.
And she's got books like Anne Frank, Florence Nightingale, Mary Shelley, but I picked the ones out appropriate for this one. So she's got books on Harriet Tubman, Maya Angelou, Martin Luther King Jr., and Rosa Parks. Yeah. Now, some of those people I can tell you stuff about. Others I can tell you extremely little. They were never people on my radar. My daughter at 7, because of books, because of what's available to her, has a better understanding of very important Black people in our history, and also racism, especially like this, with Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. They go into in a nice way, but still a true way about what happened. Like they don't express it obviously in the same way that you would read a book about those people, but Rosa Parks, they talk about the famous story, with what happened that day on the bus. And she sits there and like my wife reads them with her, and they're like, crying about it, and she says, like, I can't understand, are you telling me that my friends that I have at school, or my godson and his brother, that they're also friends with, so I couldn't play with them 40, 50 years ago? And it's like, yeah, you wouldn't have been allowed to play with them.
Yeah.
And she's aghast at 7 years old. She's aghast that this is a thing. She can't in her head comprehend that this is it, because now she's at school and she's obviously able to, play with whoever she wants to. And especially at the age she is now, there doesn't seem to be as much of this going around. People do seem to be more understanding and respectful and tolerant of each other. But for us and older, we definitely had different experiences, and that will likely change when she goes to secondary school. Yeah. And she goes into, more people.
And it's amazing that she's reading them books, but she's only reading them books because she's been bought them.
No, she bought them.
But you know what I mean? She must have been pushed down a path to buy them.
When she, I'm with her. When she goes into a bookshop, it's like, she goes and buys what she buys. We don't push her towards anything. We pushed her towards that series of books initially, and because she liked one, I can't remember who it was we first bought. It might have been Anne Frank, just because it seemed unusual. But she's bought other books in that series, but she buys them based on what the cover looks like more than anything else, or if that person seems to be a bit interesting when she reads the bit on the back. But we haven't deliberately gone, you need to read these books in the same way. That's like you saying we make her watch Desmond's and the Cosby Show.
No, not at all.
By the way,
Cosby Show. Woo. No, but initially you guided it towards.
It'd be a general environment of openness to that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yes.
But like back in the 70s, if her parents had been watching Love Thy Neighbour and all the sort of stuff that was out then, it would have been an entirely different. I mean, you probably wouldn't have found those books in the shops for a start, just because it wasn't a thing.
And that's, I think that's the big problem. And the thing is, to an extent, Craig, what it's done, her reading this stuff now, it's wanted her to understand more and to seek more things out. So it has led her down a path, but I'd like to say more kind of self-discovery than this is the path you need to go down, because that's never been the intention.
My Eve is 16 and she's very much doing the same thing that your Alice is doing. She's switched on to things. She's got the different goggles on now.
But then
she's seeing everything in the world that is.
But then I'm learning this stuff now. Like, I'm doing a thing on electronic music, and it's talking about the Black roots and the Afro culture behind it all, and how music was the only way that they could keep their culture alive, because basically on the ships on the way over, on the slave ships, they were basically trying to erase that history. They weren't allowed to write, so the only way they could communicate their cultural values was through song, which is how the blues basically developed into what we know as the kind of black hip hop cultures that we've got now, and into every other
pretty fucked up. But a lot of the sort of call and response songs of early blues were basically,
but as soon as
songs to sing whilst they were doing slave work.
As soon as I read about that, I thought, fucking hell, that's exactly what Freddie Mercury did at Wembley Stadium. It's like, and Led Zeppelin were accused of, and quite rightly, of basically stealing a lot of the sort of blues songs and that were sort of, I can't remember who. I mean, I don't know enough about the early kind of black music scene to kind of even talk about it, which is kind of revealing in itself as well,
Well, I've shared a link with you there in our little chat here, the 1619 podcast from the New York Times, and I urge anyone and everybody to listen to it. And it's basically the slaves coming across from Africa to America, and the ancestors now talking about it and going back to the places, where they worked and where they were kept prisoner, and it just absolutely, it just switches a light bulb on. It literally switches a light bulb on.
It's amazing.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's amazing as well. Like, my wife was recently watching a documentary on Netflix called The 13th, which I'd heard of, but I hadn't got around to watching, and she watched it, and she said, like, I can't explain to you what I've watched, because the history and what they go into is so kind of like long and extensive that I'm going to have to watch it again. But it centers around the ways that America as a society still tries to, allow racism to exist. So the way that some laws are set up means that black people are, much higher, much more prone to foul, full foul the law, because of how things are set up. They're set up in a deliberate way to target groups without explicitly doing so.
Plus, I can't imagine what it must be like in America being black, not just because of the way that they're not treated equally, but just the fact that cops have guns.
If you go back to I think it's the 69 election, which is mirroring very much this election this year. Back then, it was the suburbs will burn, the inner cities will spill out, and it was a way of being racist without using racist words. The suburbs were primarily
white. Well, we've seen this sort of return of that.
The city were black, and if you allow, look, we need law and order, and we need to keep the inner cities and the fight and spill out in the suburbs.
I find that so.
This is what's going on now.
I'm so angry about that, though, because it's it's stoking fear in white people when they're not the ones that need to be afraid. Do you know what I mean? It's exactly the opposite situation.
Yeah.
But it's getting used to win an election. It's getting used for a vote. It's getting used. What's going on in America at the moment now is Trump's mate is running the post office. He's put a ban on all overtime, so the post office workers, there's a massive, huge backlog of post. They've taken out post boxes across the country, so people can't vote, postal votes. They've made it so hard for the minorities to vote that it's all geared to keep them down, keep them in their place.
I think it was a person of colour on average in the last election this might have been the midterms, it might have been the 2016 election, waited 5 hours more than a white person.
Exactly.
Yeah, because of how many voting booths they, not voting booths, but how many polling, don't call them polling stations, but how many polling stations they had in certain areas. There were certain parts of the country where there might be one for the entire town.
Yes.
Rather than having separate ones. And on top of that as well, there is another thing. I can't remember which law it is, but I was made aware of this by from John Oliver. But one of the things that's written into law is if you're a felon, you're not allowed to vote.
Florida. Right. You've got to pay your debt.
Yeah. And
so you've done your time. You might have saved time. You might have gone to prison, but all the legal costs and the fines.
I go further on that issue. I actually think people who are in prison should be allowed to vote as well.
I think they can vote over here, can't they?
Over here?
No, I don't think so.
I think, can they not?
But with that sort of, I've forgotten what I was going to say. Yeah, basically, there have been several cases where, because of the system in America, people have accepted plea deals where they've pleaded guilty for a crime they know they didn't commit.
That's bollocks,
that their own legal team knows they didn't commit, but there's no possible way that the judge is going to let them go. So for a shorter sentence, they'll plead guilty. Later on, they can be exonerated, but they still have that felony on their record, even though they did nothing wrong.
Well, going back to Central Park 5, that's exactly. And I don't. Have you seen that program?
No.
I think it's called When They Hear Us, and I started to. It was one of those things. I thought I'll watch the first episode and see how I go. And I think it was about 5 episodes or 6 episodes, and I watched the whole thing in an afternoon, about 6 hours worth, because I was so appalled with what I was watching. I just had to carry on, and I'd got into it not knowing what had happened with the case. I never heard the story. I was kind of too young when it first happened, and obviously we get things reported differently in England. And watching that show and watching what they did to those kids, and it goes back to what you were saying there, that quite often they're almost pushed down the route of it's better for you if you say you did it, even though we've got no kind of evidence to suggest you have, but you'll get a better sentence or better treatment if you just admit that you did it.
Yeah.
Which is just
kind of a weird way of them going, oh, we know the system is absolutely fucking broken, but we don't actually care. It'll be better for you if you just go along with it anyway.
I don't even think it's that. I think it's purely because, and I mean, we've just seen this over the last few months in America anyway, with what's gone on over there. That there's just in general, people are so corrupt that if they can fix, if they can set it so a black person or a person of color, Hispanic, whatever, if they can pin them to do a crime and get them to admit to it, that's the best result. They're the bad guys.
I've always found it quite uncomfortable getting my head around the way being a lawyer or a solicitor works, because you don't really make a judgment as to whether or not you think that they did it or didn't. It's kind of you're there to kind of get them the best deal.
Because with his
you know the system, and you try to get the best outcome for your client, even if they're a mass murderer.
Yeah.
Has anyone done jury duty?
No, I was asked to, but I managed to wheedle out of it.
So I did jury duty a few years ago, and it was a sexual assault case that I did, and it was a very, very surreal experience. We was in there for about a day and a half, hearing evidence, and then we were retired to go and make a verdict. And very much 12 angry men. And I was the angry man. So as soon as we got in there, everyone was like, well, he's guilty, clearly guilty. So, we've got to put down that judgment. And I said, we can't. And they said, well, but he's guilty. I was like, well, why? Why is he guilty? Well, because this was said, this was said. And I said, look, I'm going to have to refer you back to the thing we were told right at the beginning. And that is, you have to have absolutely no doubt that this happened. And the problem was, with all the evidence we saw, like, you couldn't be sure. Like, some of what we were told was so kind of outlandish that you thought it couldn't possibly be true. And I said, so I'm not saying that nothing happened, but we are being told that we have to make a decision based on all of this, and only one decision. We can't go, well, we can say he did this, but he didn't do that. We had one verdict to make.
So that means that basically you can be 99% certain he did it, but because it's only 99%, you can't say guilty.
Now, morally, that's correct. Now, at the end of the day, the other people that I was on the jury with, they could have convinced me otherwise. They could have given me like so much, such a hard time to say, well, we all think that, we disagree. We think there's enough evidence to say that he is, that I'd have had to have voted along with them. But in the end, we swapped, and we found him not guilty, because when I said it like that, and I said, we have to be 100% like he's guilty of all of that stuff that was done, everyone turned around and said, well, I think some of it's true, but I don't believe all of it.
Yeah.
And so unless then you can all convince yourselves that that's enough to make him guilty of all charges, if it was done, and I mean, I'm not saying all of these things are done in the same way, but if it was a case of we had to vote on different variations, like when you get a murder charge, don't you? You sometimes get like not guilty on the murder charge, but guilty on manslaughter. We didn't have that option.
I vaguely remember something about I think it might have been in Scotland, a court having to sit for, like, a jury having to sit for months, because there was something to do with, they'd said something like, oh, we don't think that they're guilty of the exact thing that you're prosecuting for, but, like, that's not the whole story. There might be something that you could charge them with. So sort of not really moving the case on, not like a blanket statement of, oh, they didn't do this or they did do this, but sort of an inconclusive kind of verdict. Is there a version of that you were presented with?
No, not at all. It was very black and white. That was the problem. And we were told specifically as well that we were under absolutely no way of searching for anyone's names that were involved in the court case. Right. So if they had found that we had Googled either party's name or anyone involved in the case's name, we could get into like trouble ourselves with the law. Yeah. And so after the case happened, after the verdict was read out and we were all kind of excused from court, a few days later I did look up this person, and he had a criminal conviction for assault. He'd beaten somebody up at one time, maybe 2 or 3 years before. It was nothing to do with the case that we were talking about, obviously a completely different crime. So that person clearly had previous. But again, if we knew he had previous, that would also potentially cloud our verdicts on him. So I understand why we were told explicitly not to do that. And to this day, I don't feel wrong with the verdict we gave down that day, because we were given a very black and white choice.
See, that's a perfect choice of words that you've used there at the end, because I was just about to link it back to how societies, and especially the leaders of societies' attitudes towards black and white people can't be removed from an equation in that way. It's not a question of being able to search for a specific individual. If you've been brought up in a society which tells you black people are this and white people are that, if you've then got a black person in the dock and you're on the jury, you can't remove that prejudice from the situation.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. And it happens. Like the only time I really kind of saw racism in my family was my dad getting angry at drivers that would cut him up. and he would refer to their race as he called them a bastard.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and the thing which I didn't understand with that was that my dad worked with people that were black, that were Asian. We even I remember going to a wedding of one of his co-workers who was Muslim. It was the first Muslim wedding I'd ever been to, and it was a fantastic experience, if I'm honest. He was friends with people from all different backgrounds, but he didn't see anything wrong with then using that, in anger.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's because of the era he was born into and he grew up in. He was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s.
There is that thing there is a sort of exemption when you know somebody to a certain extent, or an assumption that you can do that. Because I mean, being a musician and with my mum having worked in a girls' school as well, I spent a lot of time pretty much surrounded by girls as a young bloke, and the number of times, all as friends, or mostly as friends, but the number of times that I've been sat in a room where there's been a group of girls that have been basically being quite vocally nasty about men and being quite openly sexist, and I've just gone, hang on a minute, I'm male, and they're like, yeah, but you're different. And it's like, well,
but not you is always the perfect excuse for I'm not racist, but I didn't mean you. Because you're obviously all right.
I was going to bring up. I'm not going to mention names, but you know who I'm talking about. We have an elderly person that we know who we were having a conversation with about a journey on a bus that your sister had. She'd had difficulties with a bus driver, basically, and good night, Craig.
Good night, guys.
Good night,
Craig.
Bye.
Go on,
Bye,
before you're too tired to have a wank. Go on.
Monty, bye-bye.
Over me, Nan.
Fuck off, you wanker.
Keep going. Right, you're going to... I want you to beat the record of Ben.
No, I want to do that.
I want a 3-hour
Can we not just
podcast out
beat
of
Ben?
you cunts.
Sorry.
Beat Ben
But-
with your semi-erect
Sorry, Craig.
penises.
Craig, you're breaking up. Can't hear you.
Thank you for joining us. Oh, he's gone.
I'm glad
what
he
was I
did.
going to say? Yes, and they just could not see what we were talking about when we pulled them up on, because they'd said, she'd said that she was having trouble with the bus driver, and they'd been really nasty to her, and that, and this elderly person that we know had said, were they foreign? I bet they were Polish or something, and we were like, we were just trying, we just, our gobs were wide open, weren't they? We were like, you can't see how that's unacceptable, can you? And they're like, no, I'm not racist or anything.
I think it's especially with that particular person. I think they have a very different information stream to what we're probably used to. Like, a lot of their stuff will come from like the 6 o'clock news or whatever. That's usually like tragedies and stuff like that, or from documentaries and stuff.
I've got into some trouble recently because obviously because of mainly because of George Floyd. Let's be honest. But we've had the Black Lives Matter movement really kind of come to the forefront. We've had protests, we've had rallies. We have seen a little bit of looting. We've also
in your
seen,
area,
yeah, especially in my area. We've also seen evidence of how that looting has started, and it's not always what you think it is as well, which is interesting. But what it's also led to is a lot of, with Black Lives Matter, is, well, all lives matter, don't they? Yeah. And I've had some elderly people in my family, my extended family, who seem to just share any old kind of nonsense about all lives matter. And I got told off because I kept pointing out to this particular person about what it actually represents and what it actually means, and why this article you're sharing is actually part of the problem. And I got kind of pulled to task about it, because it was like, well, she's got, no one really follows her, and no one's really paying attention to her. And I said to my wife, yeah, but just because that isn't, I said, everyone is doing that. And the more people that are not pulled up to say, actually, what you're doing here is wrong, that's how change happens, right? It's like,
the difficulty is how do you not necessarily confront somebody, but how do you inform someone that their attitude is like that? I mean, in this particular instance, I tried to point out that that's exactly the same attitude that would have seen an older person being nasty to Nienna, your sister, because she was a teenager and for no other reason than that. But she just people. How do you illuminate people's prejudice without insulting them, so that they're not kind of their guards up and they don't want to hear it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think, to be honest, most of the time there isn't a right answer, because they're either willing to listen to you or they're not. They've either made their mind up or they haven't. You know, but to me, it's just the snowball kind of effect. Like, I had decided 3 years ago, whatever it was now, to not eat meat, and I made that decision because, not because I didn't like meat, I fucking love meat, but because I kept watching documentaries about and reading articles about the planet and the impact that.
I'm feeling guilty now because I've gone completely back the other way. I did it for about 6 months, and then I just Christmas happened and.
But the thing is, like, I couldn't be a hypocrite anymore. I couldn't say, "Oh, isn't this bad about what's happening to the world?" without trying to do something. Now, the thing is, I know, me personally, me making dietary decisions like that hasn't saved the planet, and nor, you know, will another person doing it. Now, since I decided to do it, my wife joined me on that journey, and now my daughter's joined us on that journey. I didn't ask my wife to do it, and we didn't ask my daughter to do it. They both did it for the same reasons.
I mean, you probably know more about this than me then, because, I mean, you're pescatarian, aren't you?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, do you know the sort of facts behind the fish farming industries and how much of an effect they have on...
I've got to make a start somewhere, okay?
Yeah. No, I was just asking genuinely.
Eventually, I'll probably become vegan. Fish farming doesn't seem to be as much of a problem as actual just regular fishing, because of the way that it's actually done. Fish farming has its own issues in terms of, like, disease and the actual quality of fish that you then consume, which can then lead to other things. I get that, but fishing itself is awful. Being
interested, are you picky about your fish? I mean, do you have, like, just fish and chips from the chip shop? So it's not like, oh, I'll only have, like, salmon or bass.
But
this would dig at me.
Why?
Because I don't really like cod and haddock, but I like a bit of lemon sole.
I'm not bothered with
salmon.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I mean, he
will literally sit and eat smoked salmon raw off a plate.
Amazing. I mean, I eat fish maybe a couple of times a week tops. That's about it. So I'm not particularly fussy because of the amount I actually eat, and I should be. I mean, eventually one day I would like to think I kind of go full off the board crazy, like vegan, but I will never admit to being vegan.
Thing is,
so my diet now is probably about 85% vegan anyway.
What is it they call it? Flexitarian. I think I was kind of...
Yeah, I think that's
kind of more that
kind
way.
Of where you have a few days vegan or vegetarian.
You're just basically like doing your best.
yeah, pretty much, yeah.
I think it's more for people that are doing that for, like, environmental reasons or for health reasons, where it's sort of just cutting down on it is a start, really.
I mean, to be honest, I completely recommend anyone cutting down on meat anyway.
Well, I was just going to say, that's my big problem, is that I'm a bit of an all or nothing kind of person. So if I'm eating meat, I'll tend to have, like, bacon and sausages and burgers, and if we go out to eat, it'll be a steak or a, you know.
See, the thing is, though, is that, I mean, I obviously picked the right time to do it, because all of a sudden, within, like, a few months of me starting, supermarkets started expanding their vegetarian and vegan options.
Big range.
And now you can get, you know, I Beyond Burgers and Richmond have started doing sausages.
I cannot tell the difference with sausages.
Right. So, and that's what I mean. There's so many good alternatives now for a lot of things, not everything, but for a lot of things, that it's actually very easy for me. I mean, I kind of remember what, like, bacon tastes like. I remember the smell of it. I kind of remember what it is, but I don't miss it. I really thought I would. I thought bacon would be the one thing that I did. That and
funny
like
thing is,
meat.
I didn't miss it for the 6 months I was vegan, but now that I'm eating it again, I feel like I would miss it. Do you know what I mean? When I'm not eating it, I don't miss it, but if I am eating it, I feel like I would.
I remember going to about 6 months into cutting out meat. My friend, who is and has been for a few years, like full vegan, he took me. We went out to London, and he took me to a vegan chicken shop, which I'd heard about but I'd never been to, and it is essentially like KFC for vegans. And I sat there eating this stuff, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is just how I remember KFC being," because I hadn't eaten it in 6 months.
Yeah.
And I took my wife there a few months later, who was still eating meat at the time, and I was like, "Isn't it incredible?" And she's like, "No," she said, "It's nice." She said, "But it doesn't taste like chicken." But now she's been on that journey for about a year. Now her experience of that has changed. So now it is more realistic to her, because you start to forget what it was. Like the texture was pretty much there, but you could see from the look it wasn't quite right. Anyway, the point I was trying to make is snowballing. Like, you know, you can turn around and say me not saying anything or me not trying to change someone's opinion isn't going to have an impact. But if everyone has that attitude, then nothing's ever going to change. Yeah. So in the same way that I feel that way about cutting meat out of your diet or whatever, it's the same when you try to approach somebody about this is why Black Lives Matter, and that's why it's not all lives matter. And the simple thing anyway is that Black Lives Matter as a statement doesn't mean only Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The people who seem to be most against it automatically say that's what it means.
Well, maybe there's an underlying fear that stems from the recognition deep down that they know that black people have been mistreated in the past, and they're afraid of being left in the same position themselves.
I don't even think it's that. I think
really it's weird sort of conspiratorial type things about like the Great Replacement or something like that. We're talking about like,
what do you mean conspiracy? It's all true. No, you're right. I think some of it is. I think a lot of the attitude, especially with the more older generation, and I'm not talking you, Mr. Brill.
Are you
I'm
ageist?
talking proper old. Is that for their lifetime, or for most of their lifetime, there has been a big distinction between white people and black people.
Yeah.
And Asian people, especially in England. Like, you know, if you went to a stereotypical geriatric and said, what do Asian people do for work? Well, they work in hospitals or corner shops. That's it, right? And what about black people? Well, they don't work. They just steal stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like that would probably be the mentality of certain people. So I think for a big part of this is because they don't recognise that there's an issue. I was listening to LBC tonight, and they had a call in for an hour about Black History Month. And they had some guests come in, and they then took calls from the public, and everything was going well until the last caller. And the last caller was a 75-year-old man in like Warwickshire or something like that. And, you know, he was saying, well, you know, because we're calling it Black History Month, that's the problem. We're making it different. We're making it something else, which is just continuing racism because it's separating things. And she's saying, no, she said the whole point is to try and educate and actually teach things that we didn't know.
Yeah.
And his whole argument, and then he started going on about Lewis Hamilton. Well, Lewis Hamilton, you know, he's worked really hard for him, and as a Formula One fan, we didn't see him as black, we saw him as British. And she's like, yeah, but black is his identity. So because you're taking that away from him, you're taking away his identity. He's not doing that.
He's gone through different things because of that.
But isn't that funny how
they're not recognising?
Isn't that strange how there seems to be this ability to disconnect with famous people and stars? I mean, I remember Freddie Mercury being a great example of that. That so many extremely straight men just idolised the guy, and there was almost no recognition of the fact that his sexuality at all. It was just kind of, well, I mean, the media obviously there was, but as a teenager growing up at that time, I didn't see him as a gay icon or anything. It was just like, do you know what I mean? There's so many men that would not admit to, I don't know.
I mean, I'll age myself at that. I was 5. No, that's a lie. Sorry. I was 8 when he died. I was 8 when he died. So to me,
I think it was about 21, 22, something like that.
So Freddie Mercury was a singer, and I knew who Queen were. I had no idea that he was gay. I didn't know really at that age what gay meant either. So I didn't know about anything being mentioned in the press or anything like that. I just knew him as this singer.
That's so weird. I love hearing things from different people's perspectives, because, I mean, like when I grew up, he was the biggest rock star on the planet, pretty much.
I mean, you might have had a slightly different perspective because you were, I think, a lot more into Queen than probably.
Yeah,
most
I suppose
people
I was
then,
a major
but,
fan
yeah.
so, at the time,
but
yeah, it's when the first person I knew to be gay, really, and then kind of understand what that meant was when George Michael got caught out. That whole scandal of him being caught out in the toilets in LA, which would have been about 96, 97, I think, something like that. That was the first time I really kind of someone came out as gay, and I then really understood what that meant, and then saw the kind of fallout from that.
Getting back to the black thing, because it keeps coming back to my mind. I was trying to remember the name of that film that was out last year with the two black people, man and a woman. It was Queen something or other.
Queen and Slim.
Queen and Slim, yeah. That's well worth a watch, that one. Although, actually, I have to be careful when discussing films with you, Nick, because you and I disagree on a lot of movie quality things. But you enjoyed that one, did you?
I like Queen and Slim. The only problem I had with it really was the fact that it felt very familiar at times.
Yeah,
because it had that very kind of like Thelma and Louise thing kind of.
You kind of knew what was going to happen at the end, and you just didn't want it to, but you knew it was going to. Yeah.
I mean, I think I followed Daniel Kaluuya's career. I mean, Daniel Kaluuya I first saw in Harry and Paul, when Harry Enfield and Paul Whitehouse made a comeback.
Oh yeah.
And he played a character called Parking Patawayo, which was a Nigerian traffic warden.
Right.
Yeah. This is a thing. It's on YouTube. They're quite well done sketches actually, but so to see him go from that to like Hollywood stardom, Get Out, that amazing episode of Black Mirror, and now onto Black Panther he appeared in and stuff. I think he's an absolutely amazing actor, really very, very talented. But yeah, that was my I thought it was well done, but I thought it was a well trodden story, just told in a slightly more modern way.
What do you think of the I know it's a bit old now, but the reaction of Spike Lee at the Oscars was the year before last around the whole Black Klansman thing, because it was, what was it that won that year?
It was Green Book that won.
Yeah,
but there are a lot of issues with that, especially relating to, because it was about.
See, I really enjoyed Green Book.
It's the white savior.
Yeah,
it's the blind side. It's the real story of Green Book is quite different to the movie.
I kind of get that objection to the white savior issue, but I may not be seeing it from a black person's point of view. But the whole idea of seeing the journey of the white person in that film was almost. Is that not an example of somebody being able to change their attitude?
But it's sort of an example of a film that feels like it's very much meant to portray racism in a way that is aimed at white audiences.
Right.
That's aimed to be.
I think
there to sort of help understand the world, but from a white perspective.
But isn't that? I mean, you know, I totally agree that Black Klansman was a brilliant film, and the ending just hit me. But is it not probably more crucial that the white viewers get the message, because black people already know there's a problem?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because had this been a new thing, had this idea of these films, the white savior, been a new thing, then I would say, yes, I think your argument holds water. But the simple fact that over the last 50 years, we've seen example after example after example of this exact same narrative. The story's always different. The outcome's always the same.
That made me think
the
of
white person.
Cry Freedom. Have you
Right.
seen that? Yeah. Same thing, isn't it?
Not since like the 90s.
No.
I can't even can barely remember that. But I mean, that year, I mean, I never got around to seeing Green Book because I felt it was too tarnished for me to go and watch. I would go in there with my own kind of prejudice before watching it, and I think that was
the other
fair.
thing that kind of it related to me was because he was a black pianist, so it was kind of, and he had the classical training, so I kind of related to it in that way. But
I mean, there was a particular scene that a lot of people objected to, which was of sort of, I think it was sort of making a point of that the white taxi driver, because he was more working class, was more black than the singer or the pianist. When in fact, like, that pianist was a big part of his culture at that time. Like, I think it was in particular like the eating of fried chicken or something, and it was just kind of weird and off kilter with the reality of that story.
Well, the other thing as well, so I mean, this is a different film, and again, actually a film I didn't get a chance to see. I had it recorded, and then I started to read this stuff about it, and then it put me off, which was Hidden Figures, which ties in nicely with what you were saying about.
Was that the one about NASA? Yeah, I want to see that. Yeah.
So this is a story about, and I saw the trailer for it and everything, and I know some people that really enjoyed it, but this was a story about a group of black women that worked at NASA during a time of segregation. So like they couldn't even use the same water fountains. They had their own water fountain to use, their own toilet to use, all this kind of stuff. And the fact that eventually like they were allowed to kind of come together in order to, and they basically end up, you know, saving the day essentially. But the problem is that like Kevin Costner got a lot of plaudits for his role in the film, and apparently he's very good in it. He didn't exist in real life.
Right.
This was a character created for the film.
Yeah.
So this white savior in the film, because he is the white savior in the film, wasn't even based on a real person. So that's when it gets really problematic, because again, you're then kind of going, actually, you know, we've not been good towards black people. We should be better, and this is a reason why, and this is a good example of it. So, but then
where does it become? Because I mean, obviously that revisionist history kind of idea is something that Quentin Tarantino takes all the way. Where do you draw the line between what's okay to kind of where is it kind of, where do you have to make it obvious? You know, I mean, obviously when you watch something like Inglourious Basterds, it's obvious that it's revisionist, but a lot of these other films come like based on true events, and it's so that can mean anything.
Yeah, and that's almost a get out of jail free card when you do that, because what that means is that 5% of this film could have actually happened, or one of the people could be real in this film.
Yeah,
but everything around it doesn't, and it annoys me because quite often what I do when watching a film where you do see that, you know, based on true events or based on a true story, is I then have to go after I watch the film and say, right, how much of this was true?
Yeah.
And how much of this was absolute bullshit? Funny you said about Tarantino, because I went to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I haven't seen that yet.
Me and my wife are big fans of Tarantino. So a new Tarantino film coming out, that was a date night, a very rare date night for us. You know, the mother-in-law came round. We went out to go and see it. It's almost 3 hours long. It's a long old film. I went in expecting to see, I knew it was about Manson and Sharon Tate. and I thought I was watching a film about that. And when you see it, it's actually not that at all.
Right.
And so when I kind of left there, I was really like pissed off with it, really, because I was like, well, this isn't what I expected at all. But actually, then understanding what the true like meaning of the film was and what the film was trying to do, it's like, okay, I kind of get it now. It's very much like the Inglourious Basterds way of tweaking things for that. But you need to have that distinction. Is this real? Is this not? And I'm sorry, but sticking this is based on true events or this is a real story. No, tell me. Like, how accurate is this film?
Yeah.
Is it 85% bullshit? Because 85% bullshit, fine. That's fine. But then at least I know going in that this is made up bullshit. Watching a film and thinking this is real, like Black Klansman is a good example. Most of that story is actually accurate. If you go and read up on it, there are obviously a few things that have been changed for dramatic effects, but
it's clear that's the thing. It's sort of trying to insert, or even in some cases removing certain characters for certain narrative effect that is sort of real life's not like that.
See, what hit me most about that though was that it was clear when the footage became real. You know, suddenly you were like, oh shit. And it was the sort of stuff that they cut, you know, they wouldn't have shown on the news because it was just too brutal. That
part at the end, we watched that. I'd seen a bit of a trailer for it, so knew kind of roughly what it was about and everything. But the way that film ends and the footage that they show and the fact it kind of goes from the 70s when the film is set,
yeah,
the footage kind of goes all the way through to like literally that year.
See, until
we were
that
sobbing.
Yeah, until that happened, I actually saw the rest of the film as fairly frivolous, and then it was like, for me, it was one of those films where that last couple of minutes just made the entire film for me. You know,
I would agree. It was probably a good 7 out of 10 film, which then got elevated to probably about a 9.
Yeah,
reminds
just
me
by the last 3 minutes.
That sort of moment reminds me a lot of ways of sort of the eerie feeling towards the end of Jesus Christ Superstar, like during the actual crucifixion. I think in the version that you played in, they flashed up a bunch of images, some of which included like images of like Trump's presidency, of how that sort of evangelism has led to very horrible things.
An amateur production locally, and it was done really well by one of the better companies. But the guy who MD'd it basically, and he directed it as well. He'd loved Jesus Christ Superstar since he was a kid, and knew exactly what his vision for it was. And they basically had 4 plasma screens, giant plasma screens around it was a very bare stage, just sort of scaffolded, and you know the Romans were all like kind of stormtrooper kind of esque kind of characters,
reimagine
quite futuristic
that story in sort of
but then
punk modern setting.
As he's dying on the cross, you basically get accelerating images of the atrocities that are happening or have happened basically over the last sort of few centuries, but specifically the last century as well. And basically it just hit you as like, you know, this is the world that has been created by this kind of mythical icon figure being touted as the savior of mankind, and this is how it's ended up basically. You know, it was just like just seeing like riots going on and riot police and Molotov cocktails being thrown and all the kind of stuff in the footage that we were talking about. You know, if you haven't seen Black Klansman yet, then tough shit you should have done. But you know,
it's probably still on Netflix, so definitely go and watch it. It's a cracking film.
Something that I want to talk about. Sorry. I haven't really found a particularly good point to segue into it, but I guess with sort of the
well, not all of you can be me, so king of the segues over here.
The thing about Kevin Costner's character being added into
Human Figures.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Hidden Figures. Yeah.
watched a documentary as part of Freshers Week. They had like a big movie day where they watched a bunch of stuff called Disclosure. It's on the surface, it doesn't really seem like it would relate that much to this subject. It's about sort of how trans lives have been represented in Hollywood. But there was a particular story, I think, of a trans man that was actually murdered, and their friend who was in the next room, hearing them basically being killed, was completely cut out of the film depicting that. And they were a black person.
Oh, right, okay. I was going to say, because that sounded, until you said that final line, like a film called Girls Don't Cry.
I think it is possibly that.
That was like late 90s, I think. It was about Hilary Swank, who was it was based on a true story, a murder of a transsexual teenager. And it was probably the first time that I'd seen a story about that and really started to understand what a transgender person was. It's a good film if you haven't seen it, but I'm not sure if it's exactly that. But it sounds very similar, and yeah, it was another one of those films that when you look into it, there's more missing from it than you were led to believe. But a
lot of what that documentary talked about was sort of the origins of the sort of portrayal of like cross-dressing in Hollywood, and a lot of that a disturbing amount of that comes from Birth of a Nation, actually, sort of depicting. It's sort of described it as neutralizing the threat of like a black man to like white audiences, and making it a joke by like dressing in drag, that sort of thing, where they're sort of they were sort of turned into a joke by sort of being dressed as women in the sort of early days of cinema in relation to that.
I mean, I've never seen Birth of a Nation. I know it's is Spike Lee one of the? I know there's someone that likes to show it. You know, it's a film that's kind of banned from the public, but he will do private showings of it. I'm sure it's Spike Lee. It might be somebody else, but I know that it still gets shown around. So I don't know that much about it, really.
Simpsons popped into my head then, because of that recent. They've said that they're no longer going to use white voiceover actors to portray black characters, haven't they? It's happened across the board.
They did it with a new show called Central Park. They did it. Family Guy just announced that Cleveland is now going to be voiced by a black actor. He was always voiced by a white actor before. But Simpsons is probably the most famous one for it.
It just seems strange that, I mean, why would you have had a white actor doing it anyway?
Yeah.
I think with The Simpsons, and this isn't to give them an out, but when The Simpsons first started, they had the core cast, didn't they? The cast they still have now. Yeah. So you had the 5 actors.
I think it was.
I mean, having said that, because like, I mean,
it might have been Hank Azaria doing like,
but Bart's obviously
over 30 main characters.
Harry Shearer, the same.
Yeah, it was one of them.
Yeah, and so I think the reason for that was because of who they had at the time. The fact that they didn't have this big cast because it was a low budget thing and everything like that. That being said, what they've done after that time, so Apu's wife, for example, which I can't remember her name, but she was portrayed by a white actress. Now that white actress wasn't part of The Simpsons. She was brought in to do that voice.
Yeah.
But then you've kind of made a rod for your own back at that point, because bearing in mind that Apu and, you know, his family are kind of that American stereotype of Indian people in America. Would anyone want to then portray that is actually Indian?
Yeah,
I didn't see the documentary. I know someone made a documentary about the issues around it, and with the main point kind of being that because of Apu and because of how popular Simpsons was, him growing up, all the jokes to him or all the references to him from friends and peers was about Apu because that's how he was seen.
It's surprisingly influential. I think like a good portion of my pop culture knowledge just comes from watching The Simpsons.
Pardon me.
But yeah, I think I actually heard them on the person that made that documentary on Off Menu podcast, if you've heard of that.
Yeah. I don't listen to it because it's far more successful than anything I've ever done. But yeah.
Yeah. I think that, they talked a little bit about that, but they didn't, because it's a food podcast. It's not really the subject of it mainly. No,
I have actually listened to Off Menu before. I think it's a very funny show, but I don't listen to it regularly. But I do have a lot of podcasts where I will look at who is on, and then if it's someone that I know I think will be interesting, I'll go and listen to that particular episode. I do that quite a lot. So I'll go and check that out actually, because I think that'd be quite interesting.
I had to laugh because I've actually got to do a podcast as part of my course.
Done.
Which
Here's my homework.
Well, no. It's discussing some project that we'll have done at that point. But anyway, should we be thinking about winding up soon? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's
2
just
hours?
past midnight.
It's close to midnight. I'm sure there's a song in that somewhere, but I don't know.
See, that was a weird one, wasn't it? I mean, he kind of started off black, and then
Yeah, but Michael Jackson was a little bit like the Andy Murray of the pop world. When he was successful, he was white.
right,
When he was Wacko Jacko, he was black, wasn't he?
right. So it's
And it
British
kind of-
Scottish thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was kind of the case with that. He was very much a white person again when the sex charges came out against him. The black community kind of like deleted him.
I just realised, usually I check that Logic's still actually running. Yeah, it is running. It used to give up the ghost after a while, but it's still running.
I think it normally does that when we're doing game recordings, but
It might be
seems to
okay
go
now
right
because
for
I've
podcasts.
updated the... I feel like this is winding to a conclusion. We've tangented and gone all over the place. And
Well, I kind of wanted to talk about with that Disclosure documentary, something that I found quite striking was basically the intersection between several groups of people that are pretty hard done by, where you sort of at the sort of I guess zenith of that, you kind of got a culture of black trans women in New York, I think.
it's like a triple
Having,
whammy,
like,
that, isn't it?
Drag balls and stuff that like most of the world didn't really know about, but it was surprisingly influential on a lot of pop culture, like going into the 80s. Like the whole Vogue thing came from that scene. Madonna
How
kind
the
of
hell?
stole
How
that.
the hell do you comfortably be yourself in any not relaxed, but how do you enjoy comfortably being yourself as a black trans woman? That must be a fucking nightmare.
So it's just sort of celebrating community and
Yeah, but it's what community you've got left, because I think the point you were kind of referencing there is that, and what you do tend to find is that they're often like ostracized. They're kind of outcast from the family by revealing that kind of stuff. You hear it a lot.
I think a lot of people came to that sort of scene as young teenagers, sort of not finding a place in their home life for their identity. Oh, you've disappeared.
I'm still here.
Okay. But actually, like, the sort of film that I'm referencing here that is part of this documentary is Paris is Burning. Spoiler alert, at the end of that, one of the sort of main interviewees is revealed to have been murdered during, I think they were a sex worker, and they were strangled to death after someone found out they were trans. So it's quite horrific.
I thought the spoiler was going to be that at the end Paris is burning. So that was a bit more depressing than I was expecting.
No, I think the name's based on one of the events that they had, just called Paris is Burning. They had like different categories.
I've heard of Paris is Burning, but I've never seen it.
Before we do sort of meander towards a conclusion, I wanted to bring up, because I'm very optimistically, I've begun back at the beginning of the Disney catalogue of all the films. On the D23 website, there's a list of all 700 and odd Disney films. And I thought, do you know what? I'm going to start at the beginning and just see how far I get. So far, I'm up to, I think I watched about 4. Bambi's next.
You got into the Nazi propaganda ones yet?
No, I haven't got to that yet. That's not far on, though. Victory Through Air Power.
They're not really there, I don't think.
No,
they've been
they're not on
deleted
there.
from
But
the
I'll be able to find. I've already checked on the torrents, and I can find. I was going to bring up Song of the South. I don't think I've actually seen it, but I do remember having a Disney Songs album that had like Zippity Doo Dah on it and stuff like that. Have you seen it?
So I saw it as a kid because it used to get shown on telly a lot, which explains the 80s, I suppose, in a nutshell.
And what I'm interested in, I mean, I'll watch it from a purely, not because I want to, I'm kind of interested. I'm a completist anyway, in that, I'll want to watch everything, but I'm just curious to know whether or not it is justified in the press that it's had.
My understanding of, so although I've seen it, or I've certainly seen large portions of it, I don't have particular memories of it as such. Like I can remember bits and pieces, mainly the song numbers, but I couldn't tell you the whole film or anything. My understanding of the issues with the film were twofold. The first is the fact that it kind of glorifies slavery as not being such a bad thing, and there was positives that came out of it, which I mean, Jesus, I was reading a thing the other week about how the tipping culture in America is an extension of what happened when slavery was abolished, in a way of being able to underpay slaves. So, once they were freed and they went to find work, they would pay them less money and they would be expected to make their money up using tips. There's a whole thing there, a subculture which has continued on to this very day and is very backwards and dated and frankly ridiculous, but that's something else. But also as well that Song of the South is based on a book with short stories in it which were told by slaves. So kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about them kind of singing on ships and stuff like that, because they weren't allowed to write things down. So they would tell stories to each other, about the homeland or about, certain things in history. And from my understanding of it, these stories were basically taken by a white author, published as this book, as their own kind of work. Yeah,
which sounds very similar to what Led Zeppelin did with a lot of the blues kind of old blues songs and that.
Yeah, I think the Stones were involved in that as well.
Yeah,
I think there was a bit of backlash against the Stones as well for the same reason. But yeah, so I think it's those two things really, that it kind of like puts a positive light on slavery, which you shouldn't really do anyway. And also the fact that the source of the original book is very dubious.
Am I imagining it, or has there been criticism of? I mean, obviously there's a lot of sort of historical films and that there are criticisms of, but the pink elephant. Not when I see an elephant fly in Dumbo, is that criticised?
The crows.
Yeah.
It was particularly because one of them is literally called Jim Crow, which is like a direct reference to Jim Crow laws, which were very explicitly racist.
See, as somebody who doesn't know what you're talking about, it didn't, for me, when I watched it a few weeks back, it didn't come across. I was aware that there is some controversy over it, but it didn't come across as particularly racist to me. I felt as though it was celebrating their music in a way, but then I don't know anything about the Jim Crow thing.
Was a character sort of portraying black people in a sort of jokey way, like those minstrel shows. It was usually
like
played by a white person, which is why these laws got nicknamed Jim Crow laws.
And I think as well, it was also seen as kind of going back to the Apu thing of this very stereotypical view of how black people would talk or would sing. Yeah. Whether you go back in time and say that at that time that was accurate of performers of that time, I don't know. I couldn't answer that question. But it's definitely been seen as a negative.
I mean, I don't know who performed those songs, but I assume from the style of it that they are black singers that are doing it. But I might be wrong about that. I don't know.
No, it'd be worth actually looking into. Because I don't know the answer either. But I know that's where the controversy with Dumbo in particular, that's the main crux of the issues with that film.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, the thought of white people singing that song in that style would be more offensive to me if, I assumed that it was. We're just looking it up now.
I don't think, I think in general, like with Song of the South, obviously there's been a lot of controversy now because they're replacing Splash Mountain with The Princess and the Frog. And so everyone's kind of up in arms. Now, I've got no affiliation with that ride. I was never a fan of Splash Mountain. I always thought it was weird knowing the way that at the time that ride was being made and had opened, the Song of the South had pretty much been blacklisted by Disney anyway.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing was very, very dubious. But for me, what and I think you probably noticed on Disney Plus as well, they've started putting little disclaimers up at the start of films.
Yes, I noticed that.
About cultural insensitivity or whatever. So for me, I don't actually think. I think Song of the South has become more notorious and has been more seeked out by people because of the controversy surrounding it.
I was going to say it'd be a lot easier to get hold of now on torrents than it used to be.
I think personally Disney should just release the damn thing and just have Leonard Maltin pop up at the start and say this film was made then. These are the issues with it. Watch at your peril, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Don't stop hiding for it, because what you do sometimes when you hide stuff away is it makes it more notorious.
This
more
is
like
from
a martyr.
a sort of I think it's a sort of opinion/blog site, but it has got
it was a white man.
Yeah, the main the Jim Crow, the leader of the Crows, is voiced by a white man.
Talking jive.
Yeah, I've seen that a fair amount, and it's essentially sort of animated minstrel show kind of thing.
Yeah, I must admit, when I was watching it, if I'd known it was a white guy doing that voice, I would have felt a little bit less comfortable about it.
Also, as well, I think the problem is, I mean, obviously that is number one, but the fact that you've got a character called Jim Crow, he is a black crow.
Yeah,
he could have been any bird. Didn't need to be a crow.
Yeah,
it seems to have been a very kind of deliberate act to all of those. Putting all those pieces into place.
Yeah, and as a kid, obviously that was one of the films that, one of the Disney films that I would have seen quite often, or most often, and things like the Kiora adverts and all of that, just all that subliminal stuff being fed into your subconscious.
Can I tell you something about the Kiora adverts?
Yeah.
What was the tagline for Kiora?
It's too orangey for crows or something.
It was. Why was that the tagline?
I don't know.
Because Kiora had so much orange juice in it compared to other kind of brands of orange squash. Like the citric content was so high that it actually would kill a crow. They've got a very low intolerance to citric acid.
All right.
And so if a crow was to drink Kiora, it would die. Or at least get very, very sick.
Okay.
So actually, the tagline was true. it was too orangey for crows.
But there was that. I mean, there was that sort of stereotypical the one with the really long legs and the basketball. Like he was obviously a black basketball player, you know.
Oh yeah, I'm not talking about why those adverts are wrong, why they were culturally insensitive. I'm just talking about why the tagline was so good. Again, and I mean, and also, you know, you got to. When I first watched Dumbo, or when Dumbo first came out on video, it was at the same time that those adverts were going on.
Yeah.
Now, when I'm watching Dumbo, I'm not sitting there going, "Oh, this was made 40 years ago," or however many years it was at that time. I'm seeing that at the same time I'm seeing this. So last night I watched The Sword in the Stone for the first time in years.
Yeah.
Hadn't seen it. I love it. Great film. But when I used to watch it as a kid, I used to think it's really weird how not the main character, but the other son in it, the one. So Arthur Wall is kind of adopted by this man who has a son, and the son in the film I thought always reminded me of the characters from Dragon's Lair, the old Laserdisc video game. Do you remember that?
No.
So Dragon's Lair was a video game that came out in the early 80s, and it was made by Don Bluth, who went on to do The Secrets of Nim, American Tail. Mm-hmm. He was a Disney animator, and this video game was an animated video game. You couldn't control it properly. You could do actions to change the story.
Yeah,
but it was like playing an actual cartoon in real time. He drew some of the characters in The Sword in the Stone, and then 20 years later made Dragon's Lair.
Yeah.
And so actually, when you look at the character designs, yes, they are very identical, probably because he was involved in the creation of both of them. There you go. This is the problem with having me on a podcast. Your own fault. I told you.
Well, do we have anything else to say apart from recommending that everybody consumes as much of the material on Black History Month that's available to them?
I mean, I guess it was a sort of note that I wanted to make on the conversation earlier in the podcast of because we're all white people. Our experience of racism is basically all secondhand. It'll be limited to where we're basically around people that would be experiencing that, and we might not understand every instance of when it's actually happening. I mean, just sort of educating yourself as a first point, but I guess we're sort of talking about trying not to be a bystander when you see instances of racism in like conversations.
The other thing,
perhaps with older relatives,
it's not like there's any excuse nowadays, because it's not just about black people. It's about like Lithuanians and Polish people and the Welsh, and you know there is so much diversity out there.
That is, you've got
no excuse.
I've noticed
find out now.
Being a university student now,
you haven't mentioned that before.
What?
You haven't mentioned that yet on the podcast.
Haven't I?
No.
Okay. How? I've been to like various online events. Obviously, we can't do them in person right now, but a lot of them are obviously not from the UK originally, and it's just sort of. It's not an issue. It's not like a sort of big thing. It's just that loads of people have come to this place to study and to be there in the pursuit of knowledge, I suppose. I
suppose.
I think that's part of the sort of Aberdeen tagline back from the 1400s.
What, I suppose?
No, pursuit of knowledge in...
Is it?
Or pursuit of truth, something like that. But it's just sort of... It's a very different atmosphere to what I was used to at secondary school. In terms of... It's a very...
You're growing up now.
It almost feels sort of more... alive, the world, if that makes sense, in which it feels more connected to everything rather than just insular and based around one area.
I suppose that's the thing. You're not just joining a more technically mature age group of people, but the fact that they come from all over the world, it is a microcosm of our society now, that everything is multicultural. The days are disappearing quickly that you can be amongst simply people of your nationality and colour, and that you've got any excuse to be ignorant of other people, other types of people. Like nowadays, it's just like, just get on with it, get out there, learn about other cultures, respect other people, even if they're different.
I think the one thing that we have certainly seen in our lifetime, at least, is we have seen a shift towards more tolerance and more understanding. And if there's one thing that we've learned over the last couple of years, and especially over the last 6 months or so, it's that there's still a long way to go.
Mm.
There's definite improvements, but there is still a long way to go.
With that sort of idea, I think things have definitely gotten better in terms of tolerance of people that are different in a sort of vague way. Both cameras are now gone. We'll wrap
just
up.
you on YouTube now, Nick.
We'll wrap up very quickly.
Subtle.
No, I didn't mean that. But this sort of progression isn't a linear thing. That you can go back to, say, there were protests against racism in 1919 that could easily have been lifted from right now, but the reaction from that sort of movement then led to like the Jim Crow laws, and then in the civil rights movement you had a big backlash where the Ku Klux Klan got like really kind of scarily big in the late 60s into the early 70s.
I think
to the point now where you've sort of got like the Proud Boys or various other really kind of scary groups,
but
rising up
as long as you keep
a reaction of the sort of movements of our contemporary times.
As long as you generally keep things moving forward in terms of, there's going to be steps back, but as long as it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back and not the other way around,
it's
then
slow and frustrating though, being amongst it.
Yeah.
Sounds like Paul Abdul and DJ Scat Cat, whatever his name was.
No idea what you're talking about.
Don't remember Opposites Attract? Two steps forward, 1 step back? No?
Yeah, possibly.
She danced with an animated cat. It's very, very strange, but that was the 90s.
Was this I was going to say, was this in the 90s? Because I probably wasn't conscious at the time if it was.
No, you probably weren't. Look, I just wanted to, because I hadn't mentioned it, obviously this is one of the first times I've seen you with haircut, because obviously, I think we've done one podcast where you've had the haircut, but I didn't mention it then, and I feel that I mention it now. The haircut.
It's been there a while.
Probably about 6 months or so, maybe. Longer than that.
I've probably had it cut twice since then. But what are you going to say? It'd be nice when it's finished.
I've never seen you and Mickey Dolenz in the same room.
Who?
Mickey Dolenz.
I know the name. I know the name. I've heard the name.
He's from the Monkees.
Yes, I thought so. But surely he'd be like a pensioner now.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you don't just take what they look like now, right? You would take it when they, look in their heyday.
See, when I had the ponytail and I was a taxi driver, like about 20 years ago, somebody mistook me for Marty Pello.
I can understand that as well, especially being where you were.
No, I was in Northamptonshire at the time.
So was Marty Pello.
Was he?
I don't know.
I don't see the resemblance. I'm gonna have to flash up an image of.
I thought what you were going to say then.
This.
No, let's finish the podcast. Come on, because I need a piss. I need another beer.
Yeah, and it's been like.
And it's tomorrow.
Yeah. Anyway, any final thoughts that you are desperate to ejaculate before we finish?
No. If you've had enough of my voice, or if you hadn't had enough of my voice, I
We
do
have
a load
promote
of other
something.
podcasts.
Yeah.
And
List them all.
go and listen to This Is Your Life. That's probably the best one. And I can.
Is
and
that the
that's
one
not
you get
got
some money
Craig,
from?
so- I think the chances of me making money from that podcast are slim to none, but it's the one that I've got potentially a chance of earning money from. But no, at this moment, no, and probably unlikely to. But I'm having a damn good time doing it. So
Good stuff.
go and listen to that. But gents, thank you for having me on. It's been a delight to talk about a sensitive subject, and I think we've managed to do it in as delicate a way as for white men could do so.
I'm sure I shall be speaking to you soon on Ego.
Yes, fingers crossed.
So,
Fingers crossed.
yes, thank you very much for your contribution, and Craig as well, who's probably, God knows where he is now. But,
Bed,
yeah.
hopefully.
Passed out on the couch with his
We're going to go watch
hand on his crotch.
something that's uncomfortable, not quite as much as Little Britain, but at times can be a bit uncomfortable. It was 2 pints of lager and a pack of crisps we're working our way through. That's sometimes, especially for how recent it is, it makes you think.
It's a very odd show. I worked on Ready Steady Cook in my TV days, and
All right.
we had Will Mellor and Sheridan Smith on as guests.
Yeah.
And I didn't really watch the show that much, but I knew of it, and everyone was getting really excited that Sheridan Smith was coming in, and I couldn't work out why. And she was an absolute delight at the time. I don't know what she's like now. And you know, like sometimes people just have this aura about them where instantly you just kind of fall in love with them because they're so lovely and beautiful, and just polite.
Yeah.
And that was her.
Yeah.
I had no expectations for her, and she was absolutely delightful. I know she's had some troubles, and I wish her the best. But yeah, that's my 2 pints of lager story.
Well, we should wind up so that we can cut Nick off and then talk about him after the outro.
Yes.
For another 2 hours.
Right. So, shameless butt plug aside. I've been Firebolt.
I've been the Orbiter. You haven't got
I'm
Nick.
Nick.
You've been Nick.
And the other wanker's been the Podfather.
Yes, indeed.
And this has been Breaking Bollocks, episode 69.
69 dudes.
Racism.
Thank you very much. I'm going to cut you off now.
You just thumbs up racism.
Do you think his camera's frozen? We were making him stay like that for ages.
I probably could have done it.
Oh. Oh, never mind.
I'm surprised Logic's kept going.
Cut off in his prime. Maybe it's because we've got Catalina on the case now.
Catalina.
OS Catalina.
Okay.
I better say thank you very much. We cut you off mid-splurge. I was going to say, shall I stop the camera? But it's already stopped itself.
Yeah, because we've been rambling on for longer than we'd normally do.
Craig says,
About
great
2.5 hours.
episode. He hasn't listened to the rest of it yet, obviously.
See, I do wonder when I bollock on and try and meander my way through a thought process whether or not it's actually making any sense. It seems to sometimes.
Yeah, you don't. You're kind of losing the thread as you're talking, and you're like, I've got to keep
like,
on because I'm just like.
I hope I've made a point by the end of this sentence, but please, which is when I go, if you know what I mean. That's fun. Anyway, yeah, couple of wankers there.
Oh,
Not
yeah,
on
as
the
we're
call,
still recording,
just
aren't we? I
us.
forgot we're still recording. I'm
Couple
busily.
of wankers here.
Yeah, it's afterbirth time, isn't it?
Afterbirth.
After
That sounds like a.
after wank. Hang on.
That sounds like a skin condition.
After wank is a skin condition, is it? I need
Folk
a
skin condition.
wee. wee. Do you think I'm perhaps a little more serious when we have company?
A little bit.
Is that good?
I don't know. I always feel like I'm talking over people.
Yeah, that's because you usually are.
Thanks.
It's all right, so am I. But they're the guests. We're the stars.
Yeah, but I feel like I should let the guests speak because that's why they're there.
Well,
I don't know. That's not really the
debatable.
format of ours.
People don't download Breaking Bollocks to listen to Nick and Craig, do they?
Yeah, we don't really have like a weekly guest like a lot of other podcasts, I guess.
No, it was a special occasion.
I think it's Evil next.
Evil. Cool. I'm going to go away and start plotting my evil ways. Goodbye. Say goodbye to the people.
Fuck off.
That's not very nice.
This podcast is part of the After Dark Podcast Network.